Flight 2187's cabin fell silent as Darius Jackson, Fortune 500 CEO, was ordered to vacate his first-class seat. Blood rushed to his face as the flight attendant whispered, "Sir, we need this seat for another passenger." Through the cabin window, camera flashes illuminated the tarmac. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who believe justice should be colorblind. Ready to see how one man turned an airline upside down in just 5 minutes? Let's go. Darius Jackson wasn't supposed to succeed in America. Born in the roughest neighborhood of South Chicago, he grew up watching his mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Their apartment had holes in the walls where winter winds whistled through, but Darius had something most kids in his situation didn't have, an unshakable belief that he could change his stars. By age 12, he was fixing computers for neighbors. By 16, he'd built his first security program. By 22, he'd earned a scholarship to MIT despite his public school counselor telling him not to bother applying. Now, at 46, Darius Jackson was the founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies, a company that had revolutionized AI security systems used by government agencies worldwide. His morning routine never changed, regardless of which city he woke up in. 5 a.m. workout. 6 a.m. meditation. 7 a.m. review of global markets. 8 a.m. team check-in. His discipline was legendary among his employees, as was his perfectionism. Every detail mattered to Darius, from the pixel alignment on his company's app to the thread count of his tailored suits. "Success isn't given to people who look like me," he often told young black entrepreneurs who sought his mentorship. "It has to be taken, inch by painful inch." He understood the weight of being one of the few black CEOs in the tech industry. Each misstep wouldn't just be his failure, it would become ammunition for those who believed he didn't deserve his position. Today's flight to San Francisco carried extraordinary stakes. Horizon Technologies was on the verge of signing a global partnership that would triple their market value. The meeting had been arranged after months of delicate negotiations, and Darius had prepared a presentation that he believed would seal the deal. Despite his net worth exceeding $3 billion, Darius still flew commercial. "Private jets disconnect you from reality," he'd explain when questioned about it. "I need to remember what ordinary people experience." His executive team respected this choice, even if they didn't understand it. At airports, Darius made a point of chatting with gate agents and thanking flight attendants by name. He tipped the coffee shop workers generously and helped elderly passengers with their bags. These weren't calculated gestures, they were reflections of the values his mother had instilled in him. Treat everyone with dignity. Remember where you came from. Give back more than you take. This morning at the check-in counter, Darius had noticed something different. The agent had scrutinized his ID longer than necessary, glancing between his face and the premium ticket with barely concealed surprise. "You're in first class," she'd said, her tone making it sound like a question rather than a confirmation. "Yes, I am," Darius had replied with the practiced smile he'd developed over decades of similar interactions. The smile that said, "I belong here, even if you think I don't." He'd chosen his outfit carefully for today's flight, a charcoal Tom Ford suit, custom-fitted to his athletic frame, with a subtle blue tie that matched the Horizon Technologies logo. His watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, had been his first major purchase after securing series of funding. It wasn't flashy, Darius despised ostentation, but to those who recognized it, the timepiece communicated that its owner belonged in rooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. As he made his way through the priority security line, Darius felt the familiar weight of eyes following him. After 30 years in predominantly white spaces, he developed a sixth sense for when his presence was being questioned. The security agent examined his boarding pass with extra scrutiny. A white couple ahead of him exchanged glances when he was directed to the first-class lane. Just another Tuesday, Darius thought to himself as he slipped his Italian leather loafers back on after the security screening. Just another day being black in America. Little did he know that today would be anything but ordinary. In less than 2 hours, his name would be trending nationwide, and Transamerican Airlines would be facing the biggest PR crisis in its 70-year history. The first-class cabin of Flight 2187 felt like a sanctuary to Darius. After navigating the gauntlet of subtle judgments in the terminal, he could finally exhale. Seat 2A, his preferred spot by the window, awaited him with its wide leather embrace. He stowed his briefcase, containing the presentation that could change his company's future, in the overhead compartment and settled in. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson," said a flight attendant with a practiced smile. Her name tag read Bethany Williams. "Would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" "Sparkling water with lime, please," Darius replied, returning her smile. He noticed her double take as she registered his name. The recognition in her eyes was familiar, the moment when someone realized they were serving a person whose net worth exceeded the airline's quarterly revenue. "Of course, Mr. Jackson. I've read about your work with youth STEM programs. It's really inspiring." Bethany's tone shifted from professional courtesy to genuine admiration. "Thank you," Darius said, surprised by her knowledge. "That work matters more to me than anything else we do." As Bethany moved to prepare his drink, Darius opened his tablet to review his presentation one last time. The partnership with NextGen Global would bring Horizon security technology to 37 new countries. More importantly, it would create scholarship opportunities for underprivileged students across 3 continents. The cabin had nearly filled when a commotion at the entrance caught Darius's attention. A middle-aged white man in an expensive but poorly fitted suit was speaking loudly to someone behind him. "This is ridiculous. I confirmed this seat yesterday," the man said, his voice carrying the entitled edge of someone accustomed to getting his way. Darius returned to his presentation, tuning out the disturbance until a shadow fell across his tablet. He looked up to find the man standing over him, flanked by a different flight attendant, an older gentleman whose name tag identified him as Jason Thompson, lead flight attendant. "Excuse me," Jason said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There seems to be a slight seating issue." Darius closed his tablet. "How can I help?" "This gentleman," Jason gestured to the man beside him, "is Walter Griffin, one of our Platinum Elite members. It appears there's been a duplicate assignment for this seat." Darius reached for his boarding pass. "I have confirmation for 2A. I checked in online yesterday and arrived at the gate 2 hours early." Jason's smile remained fixed as he examined Darius's boarding pass. "Yes, I see that. However, Mr. Griffin has status with our airline, and according to our records, he was promised this specific seat due to a previous inconvenience on another flight." Walter Griffin stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Darius with an expression that mixed impatience with something darker. "I have status as well," Darius said calmly, showing his frequent flyer card. "And my reservation was confirmed weeks ago for this specific seat." Jason's smile tightened further. "Perhaps we could accommodate you in another first-class seat." Darius glanced around the cabin. Every other seat was filled. All seats appeared to be taken. "Well," Jason lowered his voice, leaning closer, "we do have availability in the economy section. Just for this flight. We'd be happy to refund the fare difference and provide additional miles for the inconvenience." The cabin had grown quiet. Other passengers were watching the exchange with varying degrees of interest. Darius felt a familiar heat rising from his collar, the physical manifestation of the rage he'd learned to suppress since childhood. "Let me understand," Darius said, keeping his voice level. "You're asking me to give up the seat I purchased, confirmed, and arrived early for, so that another passenger can have it instead?" "It's just a matter of airline policy regarding our elite status members," Jason replied, his tone suggesting Darius was being difficult. "I'd like to see that policy in writing," Darius said. Walter Griffin sighed loudly. "Look, I don't have time for this. I have an important meeting in San Francisco." "As do I," Darius replied without looking at him. "Jason," Walter said, dropping the pretense of not knowing the flight attendant, can we resolve this quickly? The flight's already delayed. Darius noticed the familiar use of the flight attendant's first name. He pulled out his phone and opened the recording app. I'd like to document this conversation, if you don't mind. For clarity. Jason's smile vanished entirely. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to put your phone away. For security reasons. It's not in airplane mode yet, Darius said. We're still boarding. I'd like to understand why I'm being asked to surrender my confirmed seat to another passenger. I'll need to speak with the captain, Jason said, turning away. As Jason retreated to the front of the aircraft, Walter Griffin remained standing over Darius, his expression now openly hostile. You're making this unnecessarily complicated, Walter said. Am I? Darius asked. How would you respond if someone tried to take your seat? Walter's face flushed. That's different. How so? Darius pressed. But Walter didn't answer. He simply stared down at Darius with the entitlement of someone who had rarely heard the word no. Darius felt the familiar weight settling in his chest. The weight of knowing that no matter his accomplishments, no matter his wealth or status, in some people's eyes, he would always be viewed as less deserving. Less entitled to his space. Less human. The confrontation was just beginning, but Darius already knew how it would end. He'd lived this story too many times before. Jason returned 5 minutes later, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a tall man with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command. His crisp uniform and 4 stripes identified him as the captain before Darius even saw his name badge, Stephen Miller, Captain. The other first-class passengers, who had been pretending not to watch the unfolding drama, now abandoned all pretense. Several had their phones out, recording. Darius felt his heart rate accelerate but kept his expression neutral. Show no emotion, his father had taught him. They're looking for any excuse to label you as angry or aggressive. Good morning, sir, Captain Miller said, not bothering to address Darius by name despite the fact that his boarding pass lay visible on the armrest. I understand we have a seating issue. There's no issue, Darius replied calmly. I have a confirmed reservation for this seat, which I purchased weeks ago. I checked in online yesterday and arrived at the gate 2 hours early. Another passenger wants my seat, and your staff is attempting to move me to economy despite my first-class ticket. Captain Miller's expression didn't change. I appreciate your position, sir, but Transamerican Airlines reserves the right to adjust seating as operational needs require. This is outlined in our contract of carriage, Section 21B. Darius picked up his phone again. May I record this conversation? I'd prefer if you didn't, Captain Miller said, his tone hardening. Now, as I was explaining, our Platinum Elite members receive seating priority as part of their membership benefits. I'm also an Elite member, Darius countered, showing his card again. And nowhere in your contract of carriage does it state that a confirmed seat can be reassigned based on another passenger's preference. The captain's jawline tightened. Sir, I'm not going to debate airline policy with you. We're offering a reasonable accommodation with compensation for the inconvenience. It's not reasonable to remove me from the seat I purchased and confirmed, Darius said. Especially when the only apparent reason is to give preferential treatment to another passenger who arrived after me. Walter Griffin stepped forward. I've been flying Transamerican for 20 years. I know the rules. So have I, Darius replied. Since 2005. Captain Miller placed a hand on the back of the empty seat across the aisle. Sir, I need to ask you directly, will you voluntarily move to the seat we're offering in economy, or do we need to involve airport security? The threat hung in the air. Several passengers gasped audibly. A woman 3 rows back said, "That's not right," just loud enough to be heard. Darius felt a cold clarity wash over him. This moment transcended a disputed airplane seat. This was about power, visibility, and who had the right to occupy space in America. "Captain Miller," Darius said, his voice steady, "are you threatening to have me removed from this flight for refusing to give up the seat I legally purchased?" "I'm trying to resolve a situation that's delaying our departure," the captain replied. "By removing the passenger who has the correct seat assignment rather than the one trying to take a seat that isn't his?" Darius asked. Bethany, who had been watching from the galley, stepped forward. "Captain, I can confirm that Mr. Jackson was seated first and has the correct boarding pass for this seat." Captain Miller shot her a warning look, and she retreated. "Final opportunity," Captain Miller said, turning back to Darius. "Will you relocate voluntarily?" Darius looked directly into the captain's eyes. "No. I will not surrender my seat without a valid reason. If you choose to remove me, I want it clearly stated for the record that I am being removed despite having a confirmed reservation, despite checking in properly, and despite being seated in the correct seat according to my boarding pass." The captain's face flushed. He turned and nodded to Jason, who immediately reached for the cabin phone. While they waited, Walter Griffin stood with a smug smile, watching Darius as if he were an entertainment act. Darius maintained his composure, though his pulse thundered in his ears. He'd built a billion-dollar company from nothing. He'd negotiated with world leaders and corporate titans. Yet here he was, about to be publicly humiliated for having the audacity to expect fair treatment. 3 minutes later, 2 security officers boarded the plane. They were both white men with military haircuts and impassive expressions. "Sir," the taller officer said, addressing Darius, "we need you to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." "On what grounds?" Darius asked. "The flight crew has the authority to remove any passenger they deem disruptive," the officer replied mechanically. "I haven't been disruptive," Darius said. "I've been seated quietly in the seat I purchased." "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," the second officer said, his hand moving to rest on his taser. A chill ran through Darius. How quickly the situation had escalated from a seating dispute to the threat of violence. He thought of his children, his employees, his responsibility to them. Was this worth risking his safety, possibly his life? "I'll leave," Darius said quietly. "But I want everyone here to understand what's happening." He stood, careful to make no sudden movements. The security officers stepped back, creating a path for him to exit. Darius reached for his briefcase in the overhead bin. "The airline will retain your checked luggage for security reasons," the first officer said. "My presentation for a $3 billion deal is in San Francisco," Darius said. "I need to be on this flight." "You can book another flight once we've resolved this situation," the officer replied. As Darius began the long walk through the cabin, he felt the weight of every stare. Some passengers looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with naked curiosity, as if witnessing an unusual species in a zoo. A few recorded the entire incident on their phones. But something unexpected happened as he reached row 12. A young white woman stood up. "This is wrong," she said loudly. "He didn't do anything." An older black man 2 rows behind her also rose. "I'm getting off too. This isn't right." By the time Darius reached the exit, 5 other passengers had stood up, gathered their belongings, and declared they would not fly on an airline that treated customers this way. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, Darius heard Walter Griffin's voice behind him, "Finally. Now we can take off." The humiliation burned like acid in Darius's chest. All his achievements, his wealth, his carefully constructed life of excellence, none of it had protected him from being treated as less than human because of the color of his skin. But as he walked into the terminal, Darius Jackson made a decision. Trans-American Airlines had just made the biggest mistake in its corporate history, and he would make sure they paid for it. Not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been demeaned, displaced, or devalued because they didn't fit someone's idea of who belonged in which spaces. The airline's chaos was just beginning. Darius stood in the terminal, breathing deeply to control the hurricane of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Around him, the airport continued its normal rhythm, travelers rushing to gates, announcements echoing overhead, reunions and departures playing out in an endless loop. Yet he felt strangely disconnected from it all, as if watching from behind glass. "Mr. Jackson?" A voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see a young black woman approaching him. She carried a leather messenger bag and pulled a small carry-on suitcase. Her natural hair was styled in a professional twist, and she wore a navy pantsuit that reminded Darius of his legal team's unofficial uniform. "My name is Aisha Johnson," she said, extending her hand. "I was on your flight. In economy. What they did to you was inexcusable." Darius shook her hand, noticing her firm grip. "Thank you for saying that." "I'm not just saying it," Aisha replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "I'm an attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative. Specifically, I focus on cases involving discrimination in public accommodations and transportation. And what I just witnessed was textbook discriminatory treatment." Before Darius could respond, they were joined by several other passengers from the flight, the young white woman who had spoken up, the older black man, and 3 others. "I couldn't sit there and watch that happen," said the white woman, introducing herself as Sarah Daniels. "It was obvious what was going on." "Reminds me of Montgomery, 1955, said the older black man, who introduced himself as Thomas Washington. "Different context, same disrespect." Darius was touched by their solidarity but also eager to get to San Francisco for his meeting. "I appreciate all of you taking a stand, but now we all need to find new flights." "Actually," Aisha said, "I think we need to address what just happened before anyone goes anywhere. This isn't a case of poor customer service. This is about systemic patterns of discrimination that continue to plague our society despite laws against such treatment." She opened her messenger bag and pulled out a business card, handing it to Darius. "I'd like to represent you, pro bono, if you decide to pursue action against Transamerican." Darius studied the card. "Aisha Johnson, Senior Attorney, Equal Justice Initiative." He'd donated to EJI for years, believing in their mission to challenge racial and economic injustice. "Ms. Johnson." "Aisha, please." "Aisha," Darius corrected himself, "I appreciate the offer, but I have my own legal team. And frankly, my focus right now is getting to San Francisco for a crucial meeting." "Of course," Aisha nodded. "But while you're arranging that, perhaps we could discuss what happened. The Terminal Cafe is just over there." Something about her confidence and clear-eyed determination reminded Darius of himself 20 years ago. Before he could respond, a small crowd began to gather around them. Passengers from other gates had recognized Darius from news coverage of Horizon Technologies' innovations. "Aren't you Darius Jackson?" someone asked. "The AI security guy?" "Yes," Darius acknowledged, suddenly aware of the growing audience. "I saw what happened on that plane," a woman said, holding up her phone. "My daughter's already posted the video on TikTok. It's getting thousands of views by the minute." Darius felt a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, public exposure of the incident might force Transamerican to acknowledge their wrongdoing. On the other hand, he'd spent his career being known for his innovations, not as a victim of discrimination. "Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private," he suggested to Aisha and the others. As they made their way to the cafe, they were intercepted by a harried-looking woman in a Transamerican Airlines uniform. Her badge identified her as Valerie Roberts, Customer Service Director. "Mr. Jackson," she said, slightly out of breath, "on behalf of Transamerican Airlines, I want to extend our sincere apologies for the misunderstanding that occurred on Flight 2187. "Misunderstanding?" Aisha interjected before Darius could speak. "Your staff removed a first-class passenger with a confirmed reservation to accommodate another passenger based on race. That's not a misunderstanding. That's discrimination." Valerie's professional smile faltered. "I assure you, Transamerican Airlines does not discriminate. There was a complex seating issue that our staff handled poorly." We'd like to offer Mr. Jackson a travel voucher for future flights and an upgrade to our next available flight to San Francisco. Darius studied the woman's face. She was doing her job, trying to contain a situation before it escalated further. But her offer revealed that she didn't understand the magnitude of what had transpired. "Ms. Roberts," Darius said calmly, "I was publicly humiliated and threatened with physical removal for refusing to give up a seat I had legally purchased. Your staff prioritized the comfort of a white passenger over my right to the service I paid for. A travel voucher doesn't address the fundamental issue." Valerie's expression tightened. "Sir, I understand you're upset." "No," Darius interrupted, his voice still measured but firm. "I don't think you do understand. I'm not upset about a customer service failure. I'm outraged by being treated as a second-class citizen on your airline." By now, a small crowd had gathered around them, many with phones recording the exchange. Darius was acutely aware of the optics, a black man confronting a corporate representative about racial discrimination, with an audience of strangers as witnesses. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in our VIP lounge," Valerie suggested, glancing nervously at the onlookers. "I think transparency is important right now," Darius replied. "But I do need to make arrangements to get to San Francisco." While maintaining his composed exterior, Darius reached for his phone and sent a text to his PR team at Horizon Technologies. Discriminatory incident on Transamerican flight. Video going viral. Need statement prepared and legal team alerted. Aisha, observing the exchange with the airline representative, stepped forward again. "Ms. Roberts, will Transamerican be conducting an internal investigation into why Mr. Jackson was selected for removal when he had the correct seat assignment?" Valerie hesitated. "Our team will certainly review the incident." "And will that review include examining whether racial bias influenced the decision?" Aisha pressed. The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and unavoidable. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and felt powerless to stop it? Comment number 1: if you believe corporations should be held accountable for racially biased treatment of customers. Hit that like button if you think what happened to Darius is unfortunately all too common in America today. And subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose injustice and celebrate those who stand against it. But here's what I'm really wondering: how far would this incident spread, and what would happen when a billionaire CEO decided he wasn't going to stay quiet about racial discrimination? The digital storm was just beginning to form. While Darius and Aisha continued their tense conversation with Valerie Roberts in the terminal, something extraordinary was happening in the digital realm. The videos taken by passengers on Flight 2187 weren't just accumulating views, they were igniting a firestorm. Jordan Rivera, a 19-year-old college student who had been seated in row 14, had captured the entire incident from the moment Captain Miller approached Darius until the security officers escorted him off the plane. Jordan had 6,000 followers on TikTok, not a massive audience, but enough to create the initial spark. Black CEO forced off flight so white guy could have his seat. Hashtag Transamerican Airlines, hashtag racism, hashtag Darius Jackson, read Jordan's caption. Within 20 minutes, the video had 100,000 views. Within an hour, it had surpassed 1 million. The hashtag Darius Jackson Matters began trending nationwide as the video was shared across platforms. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook all exploded with outrage over the clear injustice captured on camera. Public figures began weighing in. Civil rights leaders called for boycotts of Transamerican. Celebrity influencers shared the video with their millions of followers. Tech industry peers expressed solidarity with Darius, many recounting their own experiences with discrimination despite their professional success. Transamerican Airlines' social media team was overwhelmed. Their standard response, "We take these allegations seriously and are investigating the incident," only fueled the public's anger. Each generic reply received thousands of comments demanding real accountability. In a downtown high-rise 30 miles from the airport, Transamerican's chief marketing officer, Diane Patel, stared at her phone in horror as she watched the company's stock price plummet. In just 90 minutes, Transamerican had lost 12% of its market value. The financial bleeding showed no signs of stopping. "Get PR on the line. Now," she barked at her assistant. "And find out where Franklin is. He needs to issue a statement immediately." Meanwhile, back at the airport, the situation was escalating beyond a social media crisis. News vans from local stations had arrived, setting up outside the terminal. Reporters approached travelers, asking if they had witnessed the incident or had opinions about it. Inside, a crowd had gathered around Darius, Aisha, and the other passengers who had deplaned in solidarity. "Mr. Jackson, would you be willing to give us a statement?" asked a reporter who had managed to get inside the terminal. Darius, who had decades of media training, knew that his response in this moment would define the narrative moving forward. He glanced at Aisha, who gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. "What happened today goes beyond one incident or one airline," Darius began, his voice steady. "I'm a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I fly first class regularly. I arrived early. I had the correct seat. Yet I was singled out for removal while a white passenger was given preferential treatment. If this can happen to me, with all my resources and visibility, imagine what happens every day to Black Americans without my platform." Cameras flashed. More phones recorded. Darius's words were already being clipped and shared before he had finished speaking. As the media circus intensified, Walter Griffin was experiencing a very different kind of attention aboard Flight 2187, which had finally departed an hour behind schedule. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were not subtle in their disdain. Several refused to make eye contact with him. Others took photos, which were quickly matched with his name on social media. Walter Griffin, Senior VP at Meridian Banking Group, read one viral post. "Remember his face. This is what entitlement looks like." Walter's company was soon flooded with calls and emails demanding his termination. Their social media accounts were bombarded with comments asking how they could employ someone who would participate in such blatant discrimination. Back in the terminal, Darius received a call from his executive assistant, Maya Patterson. "Darius, are you okay?" Maya asked, concern evident in her voice. "We're seeing the videos. The whole office is watching this unfold." "I'm fine, Maya," Darius assured her, though the emotional weight of the incident was beginning to take its toll. "But I need you to reschedule my meeting in San Francisco and book me on another airline. Preferably one that doesn't remove Black passengers to accommodate white ones." "Already on it," Maya replied. "And Darius?" The next-gen team saw the videos too. Their CEO just called to express his support. He said, and I quote, "Any company that treats Darius Jackson with disrespect isn't a company we want to do business with." This unexpected show of solidarity from a potential business partner momentarily lifted Darius's spirits. But as he ended the call, the full emotional impact of the day crashed over him. Despite his wealth, his achievements, his careful adherence to every unwritten rule for Black men in America, speak softly, dress impeccably, remain calm under provocation, he had still been deemed less worthy of occupying space than a white man who arrived after him. The memory of his father's words echoed in his mind, "Son, in this country, excellence isn't enough. You have to be twice as good to get half as far. And even then, some doors will remain closed." Darius had spent his life proving his father both right and wrong. He had achieved extraordinary success through relentless excellence. But today had shown that some attitudes remained unchanged, some biases unmoved by his accomplishments. As he stood in the busy terminal, surrounded by strangers who were now invested in his story, Darius felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at the injustice, gratitude for the solidarity, exhaustion from the constant battle, and a steely resolve to use this moment to create meaningful change. His phone buzzed with a text from his 16-year-old daughter, Zora. "Dad, are you okay? Your video is everywhere. What happened?" The message cut through everything else. His children were watching this unfold. How would he explain to them that their father, despite all his success, could still be treated this way. What lessons would they take from this moment? Before he could respond to Zora, Darius received another call. The screen displayed a name that made him raise his eyebrows in surprise: Franklin Peters, CEO of Transamerican Airlines. Meanwhile, at the exclusive Pine Valley Golf Club, Franklin Peters was having the worst day of his career. He had been mid-swing on the 7th hole when his phone had begun buzzing incessantly. Now, standing in the clubhouse with his golf partners awkwardly pretending not to listen, he was attempting damage control on a crisis that was growing by the minute. "Mr. Jackson," Franklin said, his voice carrying the forced warmth of a man trying to defuse a bomb. "This is Franklin Peters, CEO of Transamerican. I want to personally apologize for the inexcusable treatment you received on our aircraft today." Darius listened silently, letting the airline's CEO fill the uncomfortable void. "We at Transamerican have zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind," Franklin continued. "The employees involved have been suspended pending a full investigation, and I want to assure you that this incident does not reflect our company's values." When Darius finally spoke, his voice was calm but resolute. "Mr. Peters, I appreciate your call. But this isn't about me receiving poor service. This is about a pattern of behavior that affects countless travelers who don't have my resources or visibility. Before we discuss how Transamerican plans to make this right, I'd like to know, how many similar incidents has your airline had in the past year? And what systemic changes are you implementing to prevent them in the future?" The questions caught Franklin off guard. He had expected demands for compensation, perhaps threats of a lawsuit, tangible problems that could be solved with money. Instead, Darius Jackson was asking for accountability and institutional change. As Franklin struggled to formulate a response, the digital wildfire continued to spread. The stock market was still open for another hour, and Transamerican's share price had now fallen by 18%. The company was losing millions of dollars with each passing minute. And somewhere in the digital ether, a whistleblower from Transamerican's Human Resources Department was preparing to leak internal documents showing a pattern of customer complaints about racial bias, complaints that had been systematically downplayed, buried, or ignored. The chaos was just beginning. As Transamerican Flight 2187 reached cruising altitude, the atmosphere in the cabin remained tense. Flight attendant Bethany Williams avoided eye contact with Walter Griffin as she served him the champagne he had demanded immediately after takeoff. Several passengers had relocated to seats farther from him, creating a visible bubble of rejection around the man who had displaced Darius Jackson. Captain Stephen Miller's voice came over the intercom, apologizing for the delay but making no mention of the incident that had caused it. His omission was noted by the passengers, many of whom exchanged knowing glances. In the cockpit, First Officer James Chen watched his captain with newfound wariness. "You know this is going to be a mess when we land," he said quietly. "Just following company protocol for elite status passengers," Captain Miller replied, not looking up from his instruments. "Was it protocol to call security on a calm, cooperative passenger who had the correct seat assignment?" James asked. The captain shot him a warning look. "Stay in your lane, Chen." Meanwhile, at the Pine Valley Golf Club, Franklin Peters was not having success in his damage control efforts with Darius Jackson. "Mr. Jackson, I assure you that Transamerican treats all passengers with equal respect," Franklin said, pacing in the clubhouse lounge. "Then you should have data to support that claim," Darius replied evenly. "I'd like to see statistics on passenger removals broken down by race. I'd like to review your training protocols for implicit bias. And I'd like to understand why your staff thought it was appropriate to threaten a paying customer with security removal for refusing to give up a seat he had legally purchased." Franklin's discomfort was palpable even through the phone. "These are complex operational matters that—" "No," Darius interrupted, his patience waning. "These are straightforward ethical matters. And your company's handling of this situation suggests a systemic problem that goes beyond one flight crew or one incident." As they spoke, Franklin received an urgent text from his chief communications officer: "Statement needed immediately. Stock down 20%. Board calling emergency meeting. Hastily, Franklin tried to wrap up the call. Mr. Jackson, I value this conversation and want to continue it. But I need to address some pressing matters related to this situation. May I call you back within the hour? You have my number, Darius replied, ending the call without further pleasantries. No sooner had he disconnected than his phone rang again. This time it was Maya, his executive assistant. Darius, I've booked you on a Delta flight to San Francisco leaving in 3 hours, she reported. And the next-gen team has actually suggested moving the meeting to their New York office next week instead. They want to give you time to handle this situation properly. Thank them for their understanding, Darius said. And Maya? I need you to get me everything we have on Transamerican Airlines. Board members, major shareholders, corporate clients, partnership agreements, everything. Already compiling it, Maya confirmed. And Darius? There's something else you should know. Our team did some digging on Walter Griffin. He's not just any banking executive. He's on the board of SkyRoute Airlines, Transamerican's biggest competitor. This revelation hit Darius like a thunderbolt. What had seemed like a case of casual racism suddenly appeared potentially more calculated. Was it possible that Walter Griffin had deliberately targeted him, knowing who he was? Had this been an attempt to embarrass a prominent black CEO, or was there something even more insidious at play? Before he could process this information fully, Aisha approached with her phone in hand, her expression grave. You need to see this, she said, showing him a tweet that had just gone viral. The tweet contained a screenshot of an email allegedly sent by Franklin Peters 3 months earlier, responding to concerns about discriminatory treatment of minority passengers. The email read, "These complaints represent a small percentage of our customer base. Addressing them requires resources that would be better allocated toward enhancing services for our premium travelers. Let's table this discussion until Q4. The whistleblower had made their move. Is this verified? Darius asked, studying the screenshot. Not yet, Aisha replied. But if it's authentic, it establishes a pattern of deliberate indifference to discrimination complaints. As they discussed the implications of the leaked email, Darius received a call from an unfamiliar number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Jackson, said a smooth voice. This is Edward Winters, chairman of the board at Transamerican Airlines. I'd like to discuss a resolution to today's unfortunate incident. I'm listening, Darius replied, putting the call on speaker so Aisha could hear. We're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement, along with a formal apology and a commitment to review our customer service policies, Edward said. In exchange, we'd ask for a mutual non-disclosure agreement regarding the specifics of the incident. Darius and Aisha exchanged glances. The offer was as expected, money in exchange for silence. Mr. Winters, Darius replied, this incident isn't about me personally. It's about a pattern of behavior that affects countless travelers who don't have the platform I do. A private settlement doesn't address the systemic issues at play. We understand your concerns, Edward said smoothly. That's why we're also committing to a policy review. But we believe a confidential resolution serves everyone's interests best. By everyone, you mean Transamerican's shareholders, Darius noted. Not the traveling public who deserve to know how you treat passengers of color. The conversation continued in this vein, with Edward becoming increasingly direct about the financial terms being offered, eventually reaching 8 figures, while Darius remained focused on systemic change rather than personal compensation. As this negotiation unfolded, Darius received an urgent text from his chief legal officer at Horizon Technologies, board emergency meeting called. Some members concerned about company being drawn into political controversy. Need you to call in ASAP. The message stung. Darius had built Horizon from nothing, had created billions in shareholder value, and now his own board was characterizing his experience of discrimination as a political controversy. I need to take another call, Darius told Edward Winters. My team will be in touch regarding next steps. After ending the call, Darius turned to Aisha. "Even with all my resources, the pressure to stay quiet is enormous. Imagine what happens to people without my platform." Aisha nodded solemnly. "That's why cases like this matter so much. They create precedent. They force institutional change." As they spoke, Darius's phone continued to explode with notifications. The incident had now been covered by every major news outlet. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements of support. Tech industry leaders were publicly standing with him. But there were also darker messages filtering through. Death threats, racial slurs, accusations that he was playing the race card for publicity. The emotional weight of being thrust into the role of unwilling symbol in America's ongoing struggle with racism was taking its toll. Darius had spent decades carefully building his image as a brilliant innovator, a job creator, a philanthropist. Now, in the public eye, he risked being reduced to a victim, or worse, a controversial figure who caused trouble by refusing to accept discriminatory treatment quietly. His 16-year-old daughter called again. This time, he answered. "Dad, are you okay?" Zora asked, her voice small with worry. "There are people saying terrible things about you online." "I'm fine, sweetheart," Darius assured her, though he felt far from fine. "Some people get uncomfortable when discrimination is called out." "But you didn't do anything wrong," Zora protested. "You just wanted to sit in your seat." The simplicity of her observation cut through the complexity of the situation. Yes, at its core, that's all it had been. A man wanting to sit in the seat he had paid for. "Sometimes standing up for what's right makes people uncomfortable," Darius told his daughter. "But that doesn't mean we stop doing it." After reassuring Zora and promising to be home soon, Darius ended the call and turned back to Aisha. "The personal cost of fighting these battles is high," he admitted. "There's always pressure to take the settlement, sign the NDA, and let things go back to normal." "Normal for whom?" Aisha asked pointedly. "The status quo works just fine for some people. That's why changing it requires sacrifice." Before Darius could respond, Maya called again. "Darius, you need to see what's happening. Someone from Transamerican's HR department has leaked a trove of internal documents. There have been 68 complaints of racial discrimination against the airline in the past year alone, all handled internally with no public disclosure. And there's more. They have a specific protocol for VIP customer seating conflicts that instructs staff to prioritize their Platinum Elite members over other passengers, even those with confirmed reservations." The revelation confirmed what Darius had suspected. This wasn't an isolated incident but evidence of systemic issues within Transamerican's corporate culture. As the documents spread online, Transamerican's stock continued its freefall. The company was facing not just a PR crisis but potentially a class action lawsuit if more passengers came forward with similar experiences. And come forward they did. By early evening, the hashtag #TransAmericanTruth was trending as dozens of travelers shared their own stories of discriminatory treatment on the airline. The pattern was unmistakable and damning. In the boardroom at Horizon Technologies, opinions were divided. Some board members worried about the company becoming embroiled in controversy. Others saw an opportunity to demonstrate moral leadership. But all agreed on one thing: Darius Jackson's response to this incident would define not just his personal legacy but potentially the corporate culture of Horizon Technologies itself. The collision of corporate interests, personal dignity, and social justice was creating shockwaves that would be felt far beyond one flight or one airline. And at the center of the storm stood Darius Jackson, a man who had spent his life excelling within the system, now forced to decide whether to challenge that system at potentially great personal cost. 24 hours after Darius Jackson was removed from Flight 2187, Transamerican Airlines launched its counteroffensive. Their strategy was as predictable as it was troubling: discredit the victim. Transamerican Airlines is committed to treating all passengers with dignity and respect, read the company's official statement, released at 9 a.m. However, when passengers become confrontational or disruptive, our staff must prioritize the safety and comfort of everyone on board. We regret that Mr. Jackson's behavior necessitated intervention by our flight crew. The statement deliberately mischaracterized Darius's calm, reasoned response as confrontational, employing a dangerous stereotype about black men that had been used to justify mistreatment for generations. Darius was in his home office when the statement was released. He read it twice, then closed his eyes and took several deep breaths before calling Aisha Johnson. "They're going with the angry black man narrative," he said when she answered. As expected, Aisha replied. "It's from the standard corporate playbook. Deny discrimination, blame the victim, rely on stereotypes to make your version plausible to those who want to believe it. They're claiming I was disruptive," Darius said. "There are at least a dozen videos proving otherwise. Which is why this strategy will backfire spectacularly," Aisha assured him. "But brace yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better." She was right. Within hours, carefully selected portions of Darius's employment history appeared on conservative news sites. A dispute with a former business partner from 15 years earlier. A sexual harassment complaint that had been investigated and dismissed. Tax records showing that Horizon Technologies had once been late in paying employment taxes due to an administrative error. None of these issues were relevant to what had happened on Flight 2187, but they served the intended purpose, muddying the waters, creating doubt, suggesting that perhaps Darius Jackson wasn't the unimpeachable victim he appeared to be. Simultaneously, Walter Griffin gave an exclusive interview to a friendly financial news channel. Seated in a wood-paneled office designed to convey authority, Walter presented himself as the real victim. "I'm a loyal customer who was promised specific accommodations due to a previous service failure," Walter explained, his expression earnest. "Mr. Jackson turned a routine seating adjustment into a racial issue. I find it deeply offensive to be accused of discrimination simply because I expected the airline to honor its commitment to me." The interviewer, a former Transamerican executive herself, nodded sympathetically. "Do you think Mr. Jackson was looking for attention?" Walter sighed, as if reluctant to voice his thoughts. "I can't speak to his motivations. But I will say that in today's climate, accusations of racism generate publicity. Mr. Jackson is a savvy businessman. Draw your own conclusions." The implication was clear: Darius had manufactured a discrimination claim for personal gain or publicity. When Darius saw the interview, he felt a familiar weight descend upon him, the exhaustion of having to constantly defend his humanity against those who would diminish it. But this time, something was different. This time, he wasn't fighting alone. Jordan Rivera, the college student who had posted the first viral video, appeared on a morning talk show to share what he had witnessed. "Mr. Jackson was completely calm the entire time," Jordan testified. "He showed his boarding pass, explained that he had the correct seat, and asked reasonable questions. The only aggression came from the airline staff, who threatened him with security removal for basically existing in a seat he had paid for." Sarah Daniels, the young white woman who had exited the plane in solidarity, wrote a detailed Facebook post that was shared hundreds of thousands of times. "As a white woman, I've never had to wonder if my skin color was the reason for poor treatment. But watching what happened to Darius Jackson made it impossible to deny the role race played in that situation. The double standard was glaring and inexcusable. I couldn't stay on that plane and be complicit in such blatant discrimination." Thomas Washington, the older black man who had likened the incident to Montgomery in 1955, gave a powerful interview on a cable news program. "I've lived long enough to see the same discrimination take different forms over the decades. It used to be separate water fountains. Now it's more subtle, being asked to move from a seat you paid for, being followed in stores, having your credentials questioned when white colleagues are assumed. The packaging changes, but the content remains the same. The message that you don't belong in certain spaces." As these testimonials circulated, Transamerican's attempt to discredit Darius began to falter. Then came the knockout blow. A former Transamerican flight attendant named Gabriela Rodriguez appeared on a major network with copies of internal training materials. These documents show that Transamerican specifically instructs staff to prioritize certain passengers based on their company value, which is essentially code for how wealthy they are or how frequently they fly, Gabriella explained. There's nothing in the official policy about race, but in practice, these policies disproportionately impact passengers of color, who are statistically less likely to be in the highest tier of the frequent flyer program due to historic economic disparities. Gabriella then revealed the most damning evidence yet. Emails from Jason Thompson, the lead flight attendant on Flight 2187, showing that he and Walter Griffin knew each other personally. In fact, Walter had helped Jason's son secure an internship at Meridian Banking Group the previous summer. This wasn't just about airline policy, Gabriella concluded. This was about personal connections and favor trading at the expense of a passenger who had done nothing wrong. As this new information spread, the narrative shifted dramatically. Transamerican stock, which had begun to recover slightly, plummeted again. Walter Griffin's company issued a statement distancing themselves from his actions. And Captain Stephen Miller, who had authorized Darius's removal, was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Meanwhile, Darius was facing battles on another front. Despite the public support, the personal toll was mounting. His children were being harassed online. His home address had been leaked, forcing his family to temporarily relocate for safety. And some members of Horizon's board were still pressuring him to accept Transamerican's settlement offer, which had now reached $20 million. The company needs your full attention, not a drawn-out legal battle, argued board member Victoria Reeves during an emergency meeting. Take the money, donate it to civil rights organizations if you want, but let's put this behind us. This isn't about money, Darius countered. This is about accountability and systemic change. If I sign an NDA and walk away, nothing changes for the next person who experiences this kind of treatment. Your primary responsibility is to Horizon's shareholders, Victoria reminded him. My primary responsibility is to my conscience, Darius replied. And to the example I set for my children and my employees. The board meeting ended without resolution, but with a clear division between those who saw the fight for justice as a distraction and those who understood it as an essential expression of the company's values. That evening, Darius received a surprising call from Edward Winters, the Transamerican board chairman who had previously offered the settlement. Mr. Jackson, Edward began, his tone notably less confident than in their previous conversation, I'm calling to inform you that Transamerican is prepared to make substantive changes to our policies regarding passenger treatment and staff training. We're also willing to commission an independent audit of our practices with regard to diversity and inclusion. That's a start, Darius acknowledged. But it doesn't address the public damage to my reputation or the trauma experienced by my family. We're prepared to issue a full public apology acknowledging that you were treated inappropriately and that our subsequent characterization of your behavior was inaccurate, Edward offered. Darius considered this. And the settlement? Still on the table, but without the NDA requirement, Edward said. We recognize that transparency is essential to rebuilding public trust. It was a significant concession, one that suggested Transamerican understood that their position had become untenable. But Darius wasn't ready to accept. I'll discuss your offer with my legal team, he said. But understand this, any resolution must include structural changes that prevent this from happening to others in the future. This isn't just about making me whole. It's about fixing a broken system. After ending the call, Darius sat in silence for several minutes, reflecting on the events of the past 2 days. He had never sought to become a symbol in America's ongoing struggle with racial justice. He had built his career by focusing on innovation, excellence, and creation rather than fighting discrimination. Yet here he was, thrust into a role he hadn't chosen but couldn't ethically decline. The weight of responsibility was immense. Every decision he made would be scrutinized, every word analyzed. He would be judged not just by what he achieved for himself, but by what his actions meant for others who would face similar situations without his resources or visibility. As night fell, Darius made a decision. This fight wasn't just about one seat on one airplane. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist in spaces without having to justify your presence. It was about creating a world where his children wouldn't have to work twice as hard to be treated half as well. With renewed determination, he began preparing for what would be the most important confrontation yet. 3 days after the incident on Flight 2187, Darius Jackson's phone rang with a call he had been anticipating. The caller ID displayed, Franklin Peters, Transamerican CEO. Darius answered, putting the call on speaker so Aisha Johnson could hear. They were in his home office, surrounded by documents, legal briefs, and multiple laptops displaying news coverage and social media reactions. "Mr. Jackson," Franklin began, his voice carrying the strained politeness of a man under extreme pressure. "I appreciate you taking my call. I was hoping we could discuss a resolution to this situation that would be beneficial for all parties." "I'm listening," Darius replied neutrally. "Trans-American Airlines recognizes that the incident on Flight 2187 was handled inappropriately," Franklin said, clearly reading from prepared remarks. "We are prepared to issue a public apology, implement new training protocols for our staff, and offer you substantial compensation for the inconvenience and distress caused." "Inconvenience and distress," Darius repeated, letting the inadequacy of those words hang in the air. "Mr. Peters, what happened to me wasn't an inconvenience. It was a public humiliation based on racial bias. And it wasn't isolated, as your company's leaked documents have shown, it's part of a pattern." Franklin's sigh was audible. "Mr. Jackson, I understand you're upset." "No," Darius interrupted, his patience finally exhausted. "You don't understand. If you understood, you wouldn't have issued a statement suggesting I was disruptive. You wouldn't have tried to discredit me rather than addressing the actual problem. And you certainly wouldn't be calling now with this sanitized corporate apology that deliberately avoids acknowledging the role of racism in what occurred." There was a long pause before Franklin responded. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Jackson?" The question was revealing. To Franklin Peters, this was a transaction, a problem to be resolved through the appropriate application of money and carefully worded statements. He wanted to know the price of Darius's silence, the cost of making this PR nightmare disappear. "I want accountability," Darius replied firmly. "I want Trans-American to publicly acknowledge that what happened was discriminatory. I want the employees involved to be held responsible. I want verifiable changes to your policies and training. And I want an independent audit of your company's handling of similar incidents, with the results made public." "That's a tall order," Franklin said. "Some of what you're asking for could expose the company to significant liability." "The company exposed itself to liability when it allowed discriminatory practices to become normalized," Darius countered. "I'm not asking for anything that shouldn't already be standard practice." The conversation continued in this vein, with Franklin attempting to negotiate down Darius's demands and Darius remaining firm. When they eventually ended the call without resolution, Darius turned to Aisha. "He still doesn't get it," Darius said, frustration evident in his voice. "To him, this is a PR problem, not a moral failure." "Which is exactly why we can't back down," Aisha replied. "The system only changes when the cost of maintaining the status quo becomes higher than the cost of change." As they spoke, Darius's phone buzzed with a news alert. Major civil rights organizations announce coalition against transportation discrimination, cite Trans-American incident as catalyst. The coalition included the NAACP, the Urban League, the Equal Justice Initiative, Aisha's organization, and several other prominent advocacy groups. They were calling for a nationwide boycott of Trans-American Airlines until the company implemented substantial reforms and provided restitution not just to Darius but to other passengers who had experienced similar treatment. "This is becoming bigger than one incident," Aisha observed. "It's catalyzing a movement." The expansion of the issue beyond his personal experience brought Darius both validation and concern. On one hand, it confirmed that what had happened to him reflected systemic problems worthy of broad attention. On the other hand, he worried about losing control of the narrative and having his specific experience subsumed into broader political agendas. These concerns were amplified when Darius gave an interview to a major network news program later that day. The interviewer, a respected journalist named Philip Grant, pressed him on issues that went far beyond the incident on the airplane. Some critics suggest that as a billionaire, your experience isn't representative of the discrimination faced by ordinary Black Americans, Philip said. How do you respond to that? The question hit a nerve. Darius had wrestled with his own privilege, aware that his wealth and status provided protections unavailable to most. Yet that same wealth and status hadn't prevented his humiliation on Flight 2187. My resources may help me fight back in ways others can't, Darius acknowledged. But they didn't prevent the discrimination from happening in the first place. That's the point. No amount of success, no level of achievement, fully shields Black Americans from racism. The suit I wear, the company I built, the first-class ticket I purchased, none of it was enough to ensure equal treatment. As the interview continued, Darius spoke candidly about the personal toll of becoming an unwilling symbol in America's ongoing racial reckoning. He described the threats his family had received, the pressure from business associates to move on, and the exhaustion of having to justify his own humanity. The most insidious aspect of discrimination isn't the big, obvious moments, Darius explained. It's the constant background radiation of doubt and disrespect. It's having to prove, over and over again, that you belong in spaces others enter without question. The interview resonated deeply with viewers. Within hours, #Darius Jackson Speaks was trending nationwide, with millions sharing clips of his most powerful statements. Meanwhile, the pressure on Transamerican continued to mount. Airport workers at 3 major hubs staged walkouts in solidarity with the anti-discrimination movement. Celebrities and influencers posted videos of themselves cutting up their Transamerican frequent flyer cards. Corporate clients began publicly canceling their contracts with the airline. By the evening, Transamerican's stock had fallen 34% from its pre-incident value. The company's credit rating was under review. And shareholders were calling for Franklin Peters's resignation. In the midst of this chaos, Darius received an unexpected text from an unknown number: "We need to talk. In person. About what really happened on that flight." Walter Griffin. Darius showed the message to Aisha, who immediately advised against meeting. "It's too risky," she warned. "This could be a setup to provoke you into saying or doing something they can use against you. Or it could be an opportunity to understand why this happened," Darius countered. "I'm not interested in revenge. I want change. And sometimes change starts with difficult conversations." After careful consideration, Darius agreed to meet Walter at a neutral location, a private room at a downtown hotel, with attorneys present for both parties and the conversation recorded. The following morning, Darius arrived at the hotel 30 minutes early, accompanied by Aisha and 2 security personnel hired in response to the threats he'd received. Walter Griffin arrived precisely on time, flanked by a sharp-suited attorney and a woman Darius recognized as Transamerican's senior vice president of legal affairs. The tension in the room was palpable as the 2 men faced each other for the first time since the incident. Walter looked smaller somehow, diminished by the scandal that had engulfed him. His normally immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his collar slightly askew, dark circles under his eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," Walter began stiffly. "I want to clarify certain aspects of what occurred on Flight 2187. "I'm listening," Darius replied, his expression neutral. Walter glanced at his attorney, who nodded slightly. "What happened on that flight was inexcusable," Walter said, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "But it wasn't spontaneous. It was planned." The room fell silent. This was not what anyone had expected. "Explain," Darius said, leaning forward. "You were targeted," Walter continued. "Not randomly, but specifically because of who you are. Horizon Technologies has been gaining government contracts that several larger firms, including clients of my bank, had previously dominated. Your removal from that flight was meant to be humiliating, to undermine your public image and, by extension, your company's reputation. Darius processed this information, which confirmed his suspicion that there had been more at play than casual racism. Who orchestrated this? Walter hesitated, glancing again at his attorney. I can't name names without exposing myself to legal jeopardy. But I can tell you it involved people from multiple organizations who stand to lose significant revenue if Horizon continues its current growth trajectory. So this was corporate sabotage using racism as its mechanism, Darius summarized, his voice cold with controlled anger. Yes, Walter admitted. They knew that as a black CEO, you would be vulnerable to this specific form of public humiliation in a way that your white competitors wouldn't be. They exploited America's racial dynamics for competitive advantage. The revelation added a new dimension to an already complex situation. What had appeared to be a case of individual bias and corporate indifference was actually something more calculated, a deliberate weaponization of racial prejudice for business purposes. Why are you telling me this now? Darius asked. Walter's expression hardened. Because they've abandoned me. When the backlash hit, they distanced themselves. My company is preparing to terminate me. My reputation is destroyed. I was a pawn in their game, and now I'm being sacrificed. You were a willing participant, Darius pointed out. You chose to go along with it. I did, Walter acknowledged. And I'll live with that shame for the rest of my life. But I want those who orchestrated this to face consequences too. The meeting continued for another hour, with Walter providing details about how the plan had been developed and executed. He named specific executives at competing technology firms and outlined the connections between these individuals and certain board members at Transamerican Airlines. By the time Darius left the hotel, he had a much clearer picture of what had happened and why. The incident on Flight 2187 hadn't been a random act of discrimination but a calculated attack leveraging racial bias as a corporate weapon. This knowledge brought clarity but not closure. If anything, it made the situation more complex, expanding its implications beyond airline policies to encompass corporate ethics, competitive practices, and the intersection of racism and capitalism. As he rode back to his office, Darius knew he had reached a breaking point, not of despair but of transformation. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into something with much broader significance. The question now was how to channel this moment into meaningful, lasting change. The answer would determine not just the resolution of this specific incident but potentially the course of Darius's remaining career and legacy. 1 month after being removed from Flight 2187, Darius Jackson stood at a podium in the Grand Ballroom of the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Behind him sat a diverse group of individuals: Aisha Johnson, Thomas Washington, Sarah Daniels, Jordan Rivera, Gabriela Rodriguez, the whistleblower, and representatives from various civil rights organizations. Notably absent were any executives from Transamerican Airlines, though they had been invited to attend. Camera flashes illuminated Darius's face as he surveyed the packed room. Journalists from every major news outlet waited expectantly. The past month had been a whirlwind of legal negotiations, public statements, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. Now, it was time to announce the outcome. Good morning, Darius began, his voice steady and resolute. 31 days ago, I boarded a flight with a confirmed first-class ticket and was removed from my seat to accommodate another passenger. What followed was a journey none of us expected, one that exposed not just a single incident of discrimination but a systemic problem that affects countless travelers every day. He paused, making eye contact with various journalists in the room. Today, I'm announcing several developments that I believe represent not just resolution but transformation. First, Transamerican Airlines has agreed to a settlement of $50 million. This money will not go to me personally. Instead, it will fund the newly established Transportation Equity Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to identifying, documenting, and addressing discrimination in all forms of public transportation. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Darius continued. Second, Transamerican has committed to a comprehensive overhaul of its policies, training, and accountability measures. This includes mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, revised protocols for handling seating disputes, and the creation of an independent review board to evaluate complaints of discriminatory treatment. These changes will be implemented under the supervision of a court-appointed monitor, with regular public reporting on progress and outcomes. Darius turned a page in his notes. Third, in response to evidence of broader corporate misconduct, the Department of Justice has opened investigations into potential antitrust violations involving several technology firms and financial institutions that allegedly conspired to damage Horizon Technology's reputation and market position through the engineered incident on Flight 2187. I cannot comment further on these ongoing investigations, but I am fully cooperating with the authorities. The room had gone completely silent, with journalists furiously taking notes. Finally, I want to address the leadership changes that have occurred as a result of this incident. Franklin Peters has resigned as CEO of Transamerican Airlines. Jason Thompson and Captain Stephen Miller have been terminated. And Walter Griffin has been removed from his position at Meridian Banking Group. Darius paused again, his expression becoming more contemplative. But this isn't about punishment. It's about accountability and change. The easy path would have been to accept a private settlement and move on. Many advised me to do exactly that. But easy paths rarely lead to meaningful transformation. Real change requires discomfort. It demands that we confront difficult truths about our institutions and ourselves. He looked directly into the main camera. As a black man in America, I've spent my life navigating spaces not designed with people like me in mind. I've worked twice as hard, been twice as careful, and still found myself vulnerable to the kind of treatment I experienced on that flight. My success didn't shield me from discrimination. If anything, it made me a more visible target. Darius's voice remained steady, but the emotion behind his words was evident. However, this experience has also shown me the power of solidarity. I want to specifically acknowledge the passengers who stood up and left that flight in protest. Their willingness to sacrifice convenience for principle reminds us that change happens when people of all backgrounds recognize injustice and refuse to be complicit in it. He gestured to the people seated behind him. Each person here played a crucial role in transforming an individual incident into a movement for systemic change. Their courage, from recording videos to sharing their own experiences to blowing the whistle on corporate misconduct, demonstrates that justice requires collective action. Darius took a deep breath before delivering his final thoughts. Some have asked why I pursued this matter so aggressively when I have already achieved so much in my life. The answer is simple, because justice isn't just about personal vindication. It's about creating systems that treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their race, wealth, or status. It's about ensuring that the next generation won't have to fight the same battles we've fought. He looked directly at the assembled journalists. Today isn't the end of this journey. It's the beginning of a new chapter in our ongoing struggle to build a more equitable society. The Transportation Equity Initiative will continue this work long after today's headlines fade. And I invite all of you, regardless of your background or industry, to join us in this crucial effort. With that, Darius opened the floor to questions. For the next hour, he answered inquiries about the settlement, the policy changes, and the broader implications of the case. Throughout, he maintained the same calm, dignified demeanor that had characterized his response from the beginning. When the press conference concluded, Darius was approached by a young black flight attendant who had been watching from the back of the room. "Mr. Jackson," she said, extending her hand. "I just wanted to thank you. I've worked for another airline for 6 years, and I've seen so many instances of the kind of treatment you experienced. Most passengers don't have the resources to fight back. What you've done here will help protect so many people." Darius shook her hand warmly. That was the goal. This was never just about one seat on one flight. As Darius prepared to leave, he received a text from his daughter Zora, watched the press conference online. "So proud of you, Dad. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." 1 year later, Darius Jackson boarded another flight, this time on a different airline. As he settled into his first-class seat, the flight attendant greeted him by name. "Mr. Jackson, it's an honor to have you on board today," she said with genuine respect. "I attended one of the Transportation Equity Initiative's training sessions last month. It's changing how we approach our work." Darius smiled, noticing the small TEI pin on her uniform, a symbol of commitment to equitable treatment that was now appearing throughout the transportation industry. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Darius reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a confrontation over an airplane seat. What Transamerican Airlines and Walter Griffin hadn't understood was that their attempt to humiliate him had instead catalyzed a movement. Sometimes justice arrived in unexpected ways, through unlikely circumstances, forcing long overdue changes that benefited everyone. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, not as a burden but as a purpose. Success wasn't just about personal achievement but about creating pathways for others. Real leadership meant using your position to lift those without your platform or privilege. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Darius thought about all the Black Americans who had come before him, fighting smaller battles that had made his larger ones possible. Change happened incrementally, through countless individual stands against injustice. His had been just one moment in that long continuum of progress. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming passengers and specifically acknowledging the honor of having Darius Jackson aboard. It was a small gesture, but it represented something profound, recognition of his humanity and dignity. Not because of his wealth or status, but because of who he was as a person. And in the end, wasn't that what the entire fight had been about? The right to be seen, respected, and treated with basic human dignity, regardless of race. The right to occupy space without having to justify your presence. The right to sit in a seat you had rightfully purchased without being displaced for someone deemed more deserving. Simple rights, yet ones that had required extraordinary effort to defend. What would you have done in Darius's situation? Would you have quietly accepted the airline's initial settlement offer, or fought for systemic change like he did? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and resilience. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that standing up against discrimination creates ripples that can transform entire industries. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to give up your seat. The story of Darius Jackson teaches us that dignity cannot be measured by wealth or status. Despite being a billionaire CEO, Darius faced the same racial discrimination that affects countless Black Americans daily. His experience reveals how racism operates regardless of achievement level. No amount of success provides complete immunity from bias. More importantly, this narrative highlights the power of refusing to accept injustice quietly. When Darius chose accountability over a private settlement, he transformed a personal humiliation into systemic change. His decision reminds us that true leadership means using your platform to create pathways for others. The solidarity shown by passengers who left the flight demonstrates how allyship works. Change happens when people recognize injustice and refuse to be complicit, even at personal inconvenience. Perhaps the most powerful lesson is about institutional transformation. Only by exposing discriminatory patterns and demanding structural changes could meaningful progress occur. The Transportation Equity Initiative represents the kind of lasting solution that addresses root causes rather than symptoms. Ultimately, this story reminds us that justice requires both individual courage and collective action. Each stand against discrimination creates ripples that extend far beyond one person or incident. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and stayed silent, or found the courage to speak up? Share your experience in the comments below. What would you have done if you were on that flight? Would you have left in solidarity or remained seated? If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about standing up against injustice. These stories matter. They remind us that change is possible when we refuse to accept the status quo. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the everyday reality of discrimination and the importance of allyship. Together, we can create a world where nobody has to fight for the dignity of keeping their rightful seat. Thank you for watching and being part of this important conversation. Remember, justice isn't just about one person's victory, it's about creating systems that respect everyone's humanity.